you had to go through a transition of your own, dealt with family loss early on when you were younger, and addiction and all that. Why don't you, before you were making millions and helping others become millionaires? Uh, what were some of the challenges? What was the little bit of the background before we get into that?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of people who find success in their life do so because they have a chip on their shoulder and they're trying to prove something. And that's been my story most of my life. I've been trying to give honor to and prove love to my mother, and trying to uh, prove that I am not my father's son. An interesting compilation of both of those. My parents, at the age of two, they weren't at the age of two, but I was at the age of two. My parents divorced, and my dad all but abandoned our family. And I'd see him every couple of years, and when he'd come, he'd stumble in drunk and just not a great man to be around. And so, orphaned by him, essentially left with just my mom. And my mom was a very talented woman, but also played scared most of her life. And so we lived one foot in the welfare bucket, and went from trailer trash to living in a dumpy apartment building. And then when I was 10 years old, my dad got hit by a wrecking ball and knocked off of a roof and broke his back and was disabled and paralyzed. He was disabled, not paralyzed, but unable to work for the rest of his life. And so we got 8 years of child support from that, what he had never paid. And that allowed us to buy our very first and only house, which was a $54,000 townhouse, which was like the Ritz Carlton for us, from where we were at. And I watched my mom work 3 jobs just so I didn't have to wear Payless shoes. And so never missed a thing. She was just like this super woman. But at the age of when I was 16, when I was a sophomore in high school, I went on this mission trip with my church, literally like melted me and broke my heart. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do. Is I want to serve people, and I want to love people, and I want to give to people, and I want to support people. And I came back, and driving back from the airport, I asked my mom, I'm like, hey, you had a doctor's appointment when I was gone. How'd that go? She's like, well, it didn't go so well. And she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, which eventually took her life 5 years later. And so I went from this like high and clarity moment of my entire life, feeling like I knew what I'm here on this earth for, and that is to impact and to make a difference. And then my only parent, my caretaker, my everything, was on her deathbed. And in fact, the cancer that she had was cervical cancer, and you get cervical cancer from HPV or genital warts, which is a weird thing to talk about, that my mom had an STD, but she contracted it either from one of my dad's many affairs, or there was a time that my sister was born, but I wasn't. She's 4 years older than I was. My dad got a phone call saying, Larry, you need to come into work. He was a roofer. And so he went in, and the guys that made the phone call broke into our trailer and robbed my dad of all of his drugs and money, because he was a drug dealer, robbed him of all those things, and then raped my mom. And so my mom had this 5-year cancer battle, and eventually it took her life in 2001 from my dad. And so my dad was, in my mind early on, when I was only seeing things in black and white, as my dad murdered my mom. And it was I don't believe that to be true anymore. I understand the contrast and the different things that led to all this. And he never intended on being an asshole. Right. And I don't think anybody sets out to do that. He was a broken, weak, selfish man who was trying to protect himself and didn't recognize the harm of his actions or inactions. And so I found a lot of grace for him. I found a lot of peace and forgiveness for him. But that came 6 months prior to him passing away in 2012. When I graduated from college, and my mom died when I was in college. When I graduated from college, my church had just like totally wrapped their arms around me and supported me, and eventually gave me employment as well. So I was doing youth ministry for 8 years, and I had this kid in my youth ministry who had an estranged dad and a broken relationship with him. And he came to me one day. He's like, hey, my dad's like super sick. He's going to die. And like, I have all these emotions and all these complications and all these feelings around it. And I challenged him. I'm like, Graham, dude, You got to find forgiveness, not just for your father, but for you. Because if he's gone and if he leaves this earth, well, you're gonna kick yourself, and you're gonna feel a lot of regret and remorse for not having taken action on that. And Graham looked at me and he's like, all right, Hatch, you first. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is not about me. This is about you, Graham. He's like, no, no, no. He's like, I'm talking to you because you have issues with your dad. And I thought that you would understand. He's like, if you want me to do something big, you got to do something big first. And I'm like, oh, man. Because I don't often show up for myself. I show up for other people, but I don't often show up for myself. And I prayed through it and I wrestled through it, and I recognized that I had found forgiveness for my father. It wasn't just lip service, and I wasn't just saying it. And so I wrote him a letter, and I forgave him, and I asked for forgiveness as well, because I had said and done things that I'm not proud of. And when it all came to be, Aaron, I mailed that letter to my dad, and he died 6 months later. And so the healing process, it didn't just happen. It was something that was happening over time. Day after day, I was gaining a greater maturity of myself, an understanding of what it was like to be not a real man, which the world teaches us, but instead to be a good man, which is who I wanted to be. And being a good man meant that I had to find forgiveness, and I had to have some grace in how I operated. And I've gone on now and have built my business on a lot of these principles, with the chip on my shoulder for trying to prove to the world who my father was or wasn't, and trying to prove to the world who my mother was. But ultimately now I'm swirling and messing with all sorts of personal identity issues as I continue to face challenges and obstacles, and at the same time serving at the highest capacity that I can with my calling. So that is my backstory in a nutshell.